Welcome to Conversations from the Edge of Consciousness. I'm your host, Kristine Madera. For me, and possibly for you, the inner world of consciousness has always been much more real and way more fun than the so-called real material world. Growing up, I thought I was alone in this, but I'm not. There are a lot of us, and far too many have no one to talk to who shares this experience. I've been lucky to cultivate a community of friends who love to talk about the energies, ideas, and vibrations that are pushing the edges of our own consciousness, as well as our collective consciousness. In Conversations from the Edge, we share our conversations with you. Welcome to Conversations from the Edge. This is your host, Kristine Madera, and we're here again today with Amy Dempster. And Amy is a earth healing expert, and she shares her spiritual journey on her blog, Following Hawks, and has really begun to create an entire community that is following her, learning how to communicate with nature and share in their own unique healing gifts with the earth. And Amy also has the Earth Tenders Academy, where it's an immersive study so that you can go dive deep with her and find out more how to communicate with ancestors, with the land around you, with those deeper, subtle energies that are becoming more and more apparent to us these days. So Amy also has a really interesting podcast called The Earth Keepers, and you will find a lot of fascinating things on that, including the topic of time, which is what we're going to talk about today. So welcome back, Amy. It's nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me back, Kristine. I'm excited to chat some more.
Is there anything that you want to say about yourself or what you're up to right now that I didn't include in the little intro?
Well, it seems like so much is shifting and changing after the solstice for me, especially noticing a lot of new Atlantean energy coming in for me, but it seems like maybe for a lot of people right now, of that kind of Atlantis energy coming in. So yeah, I've been exploring more of that the last month or so. But
we might have to talk about that sometime.
Fun and exciting times. I know, fun and exciting times we're living in.
All right. Well, let's start with time, because we've talked about time a couple of times, to use the Turner phrase. And we both have had some interesting experiences with time, and time is shifting, and how we perceive time is shifting, and experience time is shifting. And even people for whom the idea of time shifting seems really out there have been commenting to me like, time just doesn't seem like the same thing. Things are speeding up and they're slowing down and everything's happening at once. And then, all kinds of stuff. And then it seems like there's no time at all, like everything just is in the moment. So our perception around time is changing, but all of time is different than what we really consider it to be. And you had an interesting way that you began to talk about time in your podcast, beginning with a family picture. So can you tell us that story and talk about how that got you into a different way of looking at time?
Oh yeah, the family painting.
Yes, the family painting. Yes.
Yes. So, my grandparents on my mother's side had this painting hanging in their bedroom for years and years and years, and my grandfather remembers it hanging in his mother's home when he was growing up, and it had kind of, made a tour through different family members, and as they passed away, it was getting handed on, and so it was on my grandfather's side of the bed in his bedroom for years. And we were all at dinner one night. I don't know how the subject came up in the first place, but he told us that a man, spirit, comes out of the painting every single night and sits on the chair next to him while he falls asleep. And we're all kind of dumbfounded and say, you're kidding. Like, how long has this been going on? I don't know, 20 years, maybe.
Oh my gosh.
20 years. And so who is this? And he doesn't know who it is. He just acknowledges him and falls asleep every night. And so we, had a fun time talking about the painting. Everybody has looked at the painting or laid in the bed and looked at the painting and tried to fit. Nobody else sees a spirit ever. He's the only one. So we just kind of thought this must be, one of his spirit guides. And so after both of my grandparents passed away and my mom was packing up their house, she had asked if there was anything I wanted. And I said, well, I just love the story about the painting. I don't think there's really actually a ghost in the painting, but I'd love to have the painting if nobody else wants the painting, because it was such a fun story.
Yeah.
And so I got the painting. And of course, we inspected it immediately. My husband wanted to hang it on his side, which is where it is. And it was there for like 2 years and nothing, no spirits, nothing at all. And sure enough, one evening I realized there's a spirit standing right next to the painting. And I kind of did the same thing. I kind of just thought, oh my gosh, there really is a man standing next to the painting. But it was almost bedtime and I'm just going to go to sleep. And he was back the next night, at which point I realized I really probably better talk to this guy and figure out who he is. And he really made this connection of the painting being a bit of a portal, for lack of a better term, but that it was a connection to my soul family, obviously my other people in the family as well, who are connected. But he came through to say that he was a timeline or interdimensional guide who was here to teach me more about time and how kind of some of these more interdimensional things work. And so I only saw him a couple of times and then he was gone. I haven't seen him since. This is a couple of years ago now. But sure enough, from that kind of point forward, all of this information started kind of coming through to me, either in meditations or from other guides and that type of thing, all kind of sharing and explaining more about this. So that's kind of the long story.
Yeah. But it was your portal into this whole like learning about time and dimensions and that kind of stuff. So how did time change for you? Like what was your understanding and how things changed? What did you learn when you're moving through this process?
Really what I came to understand is, in this much more dense kind of 3D reality that we have been in for so many generations or, thousands of years, is that we've really understood time as linear, almost for simplicity's sake. The sun comes up, the sun goes down, we're born, we live, we die, all of these very linear type things that are held together by a bigger, structure in time and space, for lack of a better term, that kind of helps us to perceive it in that way. And so that also leads us to thinking about other lives that we've lived, for example, as being in the past. And what really was shown to me, and what really came through much stronger, is kind of this, first of all, the idea that all of time is happening at the same time. And I really see it as almost like this big, vibrating ball of energy that has, little pinprick points all over it. And so, this is the entirety of you, right? Your soul is much larger, much more vast than what can come into and be embodied in one body in one lifetime. And so it's almost more efficient when you think about it, right? Like if only a fraction or a piece of your soul comes in to live this life, and then you have to live, 50, 80, 100 years and then do it again to learn all of the, lessons or apply the lessons from the previous lifetime. It's actually not very efficient.
Right.
So,
no, it wouldn't be.
Really you can take this kind of entirety and this vastness of your soul level and all that you are, and really you're distributed into all of these different points of time that are all happening at the same time, and really we're able to kind of energetically send information and knowledge back and forth through space and time and to these other versions of ourselves. And so sometimes when we're having that moment of, oh, I just figured that out, or oh, maybe I've learned my lesson and I don't need to do that anymore, or some of these things are bits of energy that are coming to you from these other versions of you that are living and learning other things simultaneously. And then, you can choose to accept that new information or not, but you have the opportunity to be learning and growing on a more quantum level, I guess you could say.
And I had an interesting experience of time as well, and I learn things a little bit differently than you do. I get these teaching nights, like, and now it's happening more when I'm awake. I just get these downloads, but
Mhm.
I would kind of have 2 or 3 hours where I don't know what was happening, but I was learning something while I was sleeping, and then I'd be woken up at like 3 in the morning for the final exam or something. And one of these
So
was
much
on
pressure.
time. Oh my gosh. One of these was on time. It was actually a practical exam rather than a final exam, but one of them
Uh-huh.
was on time. And so I got woken up and with the awareness that, oh, okay, so what was happening was the awareness that, okay, if I pull all my energy into me from the present and or from the future and from the past, like then I'm just in the present and I'm in that whole ball of everything happening all at one time. But I was really
Mhm.
just focusing on kind of this general timeline, not, a past life or other kind of lifetimes with this one. But when I pulled all the energy into me, like everything was happening at once, but it wasn't overwhelming. The other thing that was happening all at once that was a little bit more overwhelming is all of my power was in one ball. Like it wasn't strung out in front of me and behind me in the past and in the future. It was all contained
Right.
in that moment. Like when I pulled everything in, I'm like, whoa, this is really interesting. And so then it
Yeah.
was then the
Makes
thing was, okay,
sense.
so move to a different timeline. So I kind of saw them as ribbons. So I moved one ribbon out and I kind of moved to another ribbon, this ribbon lifetime. And once I was there, like I was just in this space of time, and then the past and the future unfurled forward and backward. And then all of a sudden, the past that supported that particular version of my timeline was present, and it was a little bit different past than how I remembered my past before. And the future kind of was a little bit different trajectory. And I did this several times. And in one of these, I had a cat living in the same house, but I had a cat. I'm like, well, that's interesting because I don't have a cat. Yeah, and there was these other I did this like 5 or 6 times in, a little bit different scenarios, nothing huge different, but just different enough that it was like, "Oh." Like, when you pull all of your attention and energy from having to have a past that supports the present where you are and is the trajectory to the future that you imagine yourself to be, you've got a lot more power in that moment. And 2, the past and the future are dependent upon where you are in the present. The present doesn't matter, doesn't dependent upon the past. And so that was a real aha for me, like around shifting timelines, because it wasn't about having to like reorganize the past and do all this stuff about the past to make these incremental little changes to make their future different. It was like to pull everything, kind of let go of your attachment to everything and just jump and then unfurl and see how life was different there and then kind of get used to that and then jump to the next phase. And the big lesson in that was the non-attachment to
Yeah.
the past and the well, to the future, but to the past in particular, because so often we look to the past to inform the present. But in that ball of learning, it was really evident that the present was informing the past. And I've seen some different sciencey things that kind of are starting to support the idea, as strange as that may seem. So that was a little bit
Well,
different thing in time, but it
no,
was similar.
absolutely. No, I love that. It so illustrates exactly how that works. And you're right, like how much power we really have. And I think we've always been told, right, that we can't make any changes in the past or the future, only in the now
Yeah.
moment.
Hmm.
But that, things
Not
are not
true.
set in stone. And I think this is where, when I was really kind of getting an education on this as well, and on these timelines, and I kept saying, but how do you change timelines? I don't
Hmm.
understand how you change it. And it's because, we've all had our brains infiltrated by all of the, science fiction TV shows and movies we watch, books we've read.
Hmm.
And, we think that it's so much more complicated, or we need a machine, or whatnot. And that was what they just kept showing me, was you just make a choice. That's how you switch
Hmm.
timelines. And so you're right. And it's so hard to grasp the vastness and the infiniteness, as far as lives and possibilities, because you're right, there is a version of you that has a cat, and there's a version of you
Hmm.
that doesn't. so we spend so much time really obsessing or agonizing over choices we made and we didn't like how it turned out, or we didn't, there's another version of you living
Mm-hmm.
the other choice. Like, it's all
Yeah.
possible.
But the whole thing, at least for me, and that the realization was it's all possible, but not if you are attached to one, who you are in
Yes.
that moment. Like you got to kind of hold on lightly to identity and your sense of self, which is kind of a skill set that you have to build up. And then two, to kind of be unattached to what's happening in your life. And, as I've had this conversation with people, they're like, but I really love the people in my life. And it's like, well, it's not like you're unattached to them in the larger sense, because if you move to a different timeline, you and the same people are there, you're in relationship with them, but in a different way, because
Yes.
they're a different self there, but it's not like, you go there and they disappear. It's more like
Right.
you're there in this different space, and you have to let go of the expectation that that person's going to act the same way, because you're moving to a timeline where they might treat you a lot better than they have been.
Right. It's so true. And I think we we like to think that maybe we can detach easily, but it's harder than we
Hmm.
think.
It is, yeah.
We really are more attached to our identity or how we see
Hmm.
ourselves. And you're right, there's all of these, even to the fact of gender or identity, in the sense of
Hmm.
there are versions of you living other versions than just who you are in this timeline. But you're right, you have to be able to allow other people, and that's one of the things that's really made it clear to me, is letting other people have their timelines as well.
Hmm.
And that just because we are here together doesn't mean we're in the same timeline. You're in yours and I'm in mine, and we just are intersecting at this exact moment. And so, trying to in some way control the time, control, the other people that are in that timeline with you, is
Oh, that
really
never
almost
works.
impossible.
There's a lot of energy that get used up trying to do that, or trying to make, the timeline what you want it to be or what you think it should be instead of what it is. There's all kinds of ways we use up our energy. But, a way that I think people can get a little bit, like, kind of soften the experience of time, like, because time is so much more malleable than what we've been led to believe. And we lose time, we gain time, we find time, all these things around time, as if it's like this quantity that is measurable in an absolute way, versus like something that we just have a relative measurement of, because it's just how we kind of, measure certain things in our lives. It's not a fixed standard, except when you look at things like days and years and things like that. But even that's just experiences kind of flowing through themselves. And we're having more and more of, or at least the people that I'm talking to, and these are people who are, weird like us, and then people who aren't weird like us, that are having the same kind of experiences, that time doesn't feel the same as it used to. Like Monday doesn't feel like Monday, and not just because I'm working virtually, but Monday doesn't have
Right.
a feeling anymore. Like the now is happening now, but the past doesn't have the same feeling. There's not the same attachment. And the future doesn't have the same feeling. And it's not just because everything's up in arms and changing from COVID and everything else. It's that it doesn't have the same kind of sense of solemnity and solidity that it used to have. Like everything is feeling much more fluid. And you've probably had this experience as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, specifically in recent time, I have realized, I went back in my, I do a lot of channeled writing. And so I
Hmm.
have all my notebooks that I kind of carry around with me. And I went back a couple weeks ago to something in November, early December, that I was looking for, that I knew
Hmm.
was in my notebook. And as soon as I flipped the pages past the solstice, I went, oh, this energy is totally dead. It didn't
Mm.
even feel old. It just felt like that was a completely different timeline. And it's not that I can't even pull the energy forward into
Yeah.
this where I'm at now, because it no longer aligns. And so, when I notice those things, it's almost like we've collectively jumped timelines, right? We changed to a
Hmm.
different we different radio dial, a different frequency or something. And so, you almost can't hear the messages on the other station anymore. But yeah, I've also, for years have kind of had fun playing with the flexibility of time. Because I think when you play games with it is when you
Mm-hmm.
realize how flexible it is. And so, and again, it's what we assign to something. I'll look at something, a task or a project, and think this is going to take 3 hours to do, and I don't have 3 hours to do it. And so,
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say, I'll look at the clock and say, oh, okay, from an hour from now, I'll be done with this. And magically, most of
Mm-hmm.
the time it works, somehow I can get what I perceive to be 3 hours of work done in 1 hour. And so I think the more you kind of play around with some of that, the more easy it is to grasp, oh, we kind of are controlling our experience of time. And I think with everything being removed for many people over the past year of I have to be at work at this location at this
Mm-hmm.
time every day, right? Is that you're right. It's kind of been removed. And now what is Monday? What is Friday? Who even cares? So
Yeah.
it's been really interesting that collectively we've been able to have this experience.
Well, yeah, and I've listened to some kind of sciencey, physicsy people who are not woo-woo at all, but they work in the science aspect of this, and they were playing with time and had gotten so good at, they needed to be somewhere that usually takes an hour to go to, and they needed to be there in 45 minutes. They could actually leave in 45 minutes, planning that it would only take that long. That because they were able to jump time
Exactly.
that easily, that they could cut their trip short by 25, 30, 35% consistently, so that it wasn't even anything strange. It was like, yeah, okay, it might take you an hour, it takes me 45 minutes. And
It
and
takes
I thought,
you and as
wow,
long as you think.
right. It's
Yeah.
the expectation that you bring. And they were talking about when you, and people do this with parking spots and stuff too, like on a
Oh,
regular
yes.
basis. But when you expect that, something is going to take you 10 minutes that normally takes 15, and you don't expect in that clinging sort of way, like, oh my gosh, it means something if I get there, blah, blah, blah. But it's just like, oh yeah, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Like that, if you can let go of the attachment to it, and you can let go of it having to let go of the significance of it and just allow it to be, think you can do it. Like I'm still working on that I can do, like, on the grocery store I could get there a minute or two faster, but I'm not sure if it's because I'm driving faster or if it's
Right,
because
right, right.
I'm jumping time.
What I have come to learn, especially in the past year, is that we like to say the universe we honors our free will, right? We have
Mm-hmm.
free will, but also I've realized much more clearly it honors our belief system.
Yes.
And so if we really, it's easy to say, well, you have to believe it, but you do. You
Mm-hmm.
have to, when you believe it's possible, then it starts happening. And it's
Yes.
hard to make that flip because if you haven't seen it happen, then you might not really believe it.
Yeah, it is. And you can't believe it. Like it's got to be one of those beliefs, not a mental belief, but you got to
Right.
resonate with the truth of it in your subtle senses. Because what
Yeah,
you
you have to
believe with
feel
your
it.
mind isn't necessarily a belief that you truly hold. It's a thought form that you funnel your life through, but
Right.
it's not something that resonates with you as truth necessarily. And it's
Yeah,
that
very
level
true.
of belief and it can be hard because it's not, nothing really shows us how to do that when it comes to
No,
things like
no.
time.
No, no. In fact, and again, I think we've been led astray the opposite direction with, you need a machine, you need a tool, you need,
Oh
something to
my
do this.
gosh.
And it's hard to believe that it is that simple as just picking a different choice, believing something different.
Yeah, because we attach things like work and effort and trying and making these little incremental changes and struggle and striving and all these things that we give a lot of importance to and a lot of significance to, that we put the value in the struggle and not the outcome. But if you can just simply make another choice without it being a struggle, like there's that deep down no pain, no gain, no struggle, no reward kind of scenario in this that says, nope, that's not going to work. Like if it happens easily, it must not have value. And
Right.
that's one of those things that I think we really need to get over, because when you do, life is a lot simpler than it is when you think you have to put a lot of trying and effort into stuff.
What I realize as well is I can get myself into all kinds of, alternative ways of thinking and believing or whatnot, but then I have to go interact in the world. And our
Hmm.
culture is set up to show us that the culture wants us to have.
Yep.
If that makes
Yep.
sense. So,
Oh yeah.
we have to come back into, okay, well, now I have to go to the grocery store and somebody might show me that my belief isn't true when I get there. And so, yeah, it's difficult to kind of find your way through that and stay in your space and your beliefs while everything around you is reflecting something different to you.
Well, that's why we have conversations like this, so we can talk about weird
Yes.
things.
Yes.
And something that you had said when you were talking about looking at your journals, and I kind of let it slip by, but I wanted to come back to it because you had mentioned this in your podcast, that there was a particular astrological something in January of last year, so just a little bit over a year ago, that had us all flip timelines as a collective, Earth and humanity community, and that we're adjusting to this timeline, which I think we've all noticed that there's something afoot, like things are a little bit different, and not just because of COVID, but everything's shifting. But also,
Right.
then the other part of that you implied there is that a lot of the old things that we were doing, the old paths that we were walking, the old ideas that we believed in, the old structure of success, the old structures, and the old timelines that supported those structures were no longer supported. And I liked the way you had talked about that. And so I don't know if you can call that back in, but can you explain what that means? Like when timelines are no longer supported and what happens to them?
Yeah. So the way I understand it is that we're all operating within a primary timeline. And I almost think of it like a tree. And so you have, or, this big tube or trunk of the tree is the primary timeline. And that is what governs or decides kind of these bigger rules that we live by, like duality or time being linear. And
Hmm.
so within that tree trunk primary timeline, you have all these smaller branches that come off of it, and they're individual timelines, but they're still anchored to this bigger picture, so they can't go
Hmm.
too far astray. They're still operating within the generally accepted ideas of the timeline. And so what I perceived happened in January is that we reached a level collectively where a new timeline could be anchored, because if there aren't enough of us who have shifted to another frequency or vibration or who can align with that timeline, it can't be anchored in. And so
Hmm.
we did that. And if you see what happened after January of last year, I mean, it really
Hmm.
massive change in many ways. And some of it is because these old timelines and old beliefs no longer align with this new timeline that's been anchored in, and now they're kind of, I just see them as like dangling timelines, right? And so some maybe just go away, but the rest of them now don't have energy supporting them. And I'm sure in the
Hmm.
past year you've noticed that, not only collectively but in your own life, and things where you think, gosh, I just don't have the same memory of this thing in my life that I used to, or I can't remember it anymore, or have, or maybe there's things that are coming up that you hadn't thought of before. And so it takes I should say it takes a little time to resolve them,
Hmm.
but I mean, it doesn't, but we have to collectively decide that it's okay that that they're resolved. And so that's really kind of what we're experiencing right now, is these kind of dangling timelines that have to be resolved, cleared, released, in some way or another.
Well, and it happens individually as well, because I know for me, when I was doing individual work with people and noticing that all the healing work that people were doing, they were so used to the habit of healing. And I get
Yes.
used to it too. Things come up and you heal it, you resolve it, blah blah blah. It was sort of like this this constant background chatter, oh, here's this belief, here's this thought, here's this resonance, here's this emotion, blah, and then it comes up, you resolve, release, and open up into a greater sense of freedom. And I had been noticing, and I noticed even more this year, that like those things, the habit is still there, but the
Mhm.
things to be released, one, there's some of the bigger, deeper, denser stuff that kind of comes up that would have been a few years ago really daunting, that kind of comes up and it's like, oh, okay, I don't need you anymore. And it's like, okay, goodbye. And it's gone. Like it
Yeah.
happens like that. But then there's that habit of like needing to find things to resolve and release. And I was realizing like that times have changed. Like that's no longer the curriculum, I suppose, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
that when we allow those things to be done, they can be done. Now, if you think they're done and you're ignoring things that need to be resolved, then you're not doing yourself any favors. But that posture of
Right.
always being in a place where you're looking for the old stuff to clear so that you can, manifest what you want, whatever you want to do with it. I think that time is closed down, and then we're opening to this time. Like that's the old model that's closed. That's the 2020 model, and the 2021 model is really opening up to the new energies and letting the old energies just simply dissolve away. Maybe with a little bit of like recognition. Oh yeah, that's no longer important. Goodbye, and allowing the new to come in without having to make the whole like dog and pony show about it that we used to.
Yeah, absolutely. You're 100% true. And that is what I am seeing and experiencing as well, is that not only the habit of I need to do this in this process in this way, but
Hmm.
even the habit of I'm used to this event uh, creating part of my identity. And am
Hmm.
I really ready to let that go? And can I, I've done the healing around it. It doesn't need to be there anymore. And so I am definitely seeing how much faster everything is moving and how much easier it is. And,
Hmm.
a lot of our healing techniques or our beliefs around how many of these things work have come from, years of
Yeah.
doing the work, I guess you could say the hard way, a harder way.
Hmm.
But as we shift frequency, as we vibrate faster, as we have all of these activations coming in
Hmm.
and upgrading our DNA and upgrading our cellular makeup, we have the opportunity to work differently and work faster and work easier. And I'm seeing that again and again. And even in my healing work, where, things where I would have packed up a bag full of all my magical tools and gone out and sat on the land and done a whole ceremony. And now they'll just say, just show up, sit on a blanket. That's all you have to do.
Yeah.
It just happens. And
Yep.
so there's a lot of that kind of releasing of the old. And yeah, with the timelines, it's interesting. So within my Earth Tenders Academy, we have a whole module on timelines and clearing your timelines and doing things like that. And so somebody was sharing with me their experience when they did it, because they had kind of this feeling about like, is it okay for me to remove this timeline, this old timeline? Because I had a contract with this person. This was a soul contract. How can I
Hmm.
remove this timeline? And what their guide shared with them was, you fulfilled the contract. You
Hmm.
had the experience. The contract doesn't go away by removing the timeline. It's just you can resolve it and move on and be done with it. And so I think there's a lot of kind of freedom in that as we think forward about the things that, okay, we did it. It's over.
There's another element about time too. There was the whole parallel universe idea that's been around for quite some time. That whenever you make a binary choice, especially a powerful binary choice, that there's the part of you that takes the one choice, and then there's another part of you that takes another choice. And you, as
Yes.
you, how you experience yourself in the moment, are on the choice that you made in the moment. But there's somebody else. There's another part of you that made the other choice that's living it out in another version of time, another timeline. And so when you were talking about that, it reminded me that just because you're making a new choice and moving to a different timeline that you're choosing to experience, doesn't mean that everybody else that chooses to stay along and attached to that timeline isn't still merrily going along in that way. Like, it's not like you're disrupting
Right.
everybody else's life because you make a different choice. They can continue like on a timeline that you're not even paying any attention to because you've all of a sudden like moved to Paris and you're living in a castle and you have a unicorn.
Right. It's so true. And I think that's what's been shown to me, quite a few times in the last maybe 6 months too, is it's the idea of, a box, like, right? Everybody has their own
Hmm.
box, and
Yeah.
you can put whatever you want in your box, and everyone else can put what they want in their box. And we
Yeah.
get confused by thinking that we somehow have collective boxes. We don't. I mean, on a big collective level, we're kind of all in the same box, but it's hard for us to realize, and this is I guess kind of what I mean too, about how the culture is reinforcing that that's not true, right? You
Hmm.
turn on the news and you're told that this is the person that's in power, and you say, well, I don't like that. Okay, well then
Hmm.
don't put it in your box.
Yeah.
It's hard for us to imagine that, but it really is possible to not
Yeah.
have that in your box.
Yeah, and you don't have to carry everything in that box with you when you make a new choice.
Right.
Like, you just take
Right.
everything out of the box and make a new choice, and then you fill the box up from that new place.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
But lots of other people might have the same thing in their box, leading you to believe that you're somehow
yeah,
doing it wrong because that thing isn't in your box.
yeah.
But it's a
Well, and
choice, it's a personal choice.
that's the thing too. I think the people who are having the hardest time in this transition are the ones who are really trying to hold on to a particular way or a particular timeline or a particular idea or a particular way of looking at the world that is waning in the larger
Hmm.
collective. And the more you try to hold on to that, the more it's going to really feel like struggle because the support for that is really falling away, and the support for like these rigid structures that everybody has to conform to. And if that's your reality and you conform to that rigid structure, okay, that's your reality, you're conforming to the rigid structure. But if if you require that everybody else around you conform to that rigid structure and they've decided to move on, there's a lot of
Right.
suffering that's going to go on there. So
Right.
the more, in my experience, you're able to live life lightly, to not believe your own stories, to not cling to your own idea of who you are for identity, because that really holds you back from making choices, to really to not hold such a have such a tight grasp on what you think everything should be in the world is going to make this process much easier because you're able to make a choice of how you want to move forward as well. You don't have to let anybody else make that choice for you. You don't have to fit into anybody else's agenda. But if your choice is to not choose, that in itself is a choice. And I think more and more it's going to become a more and more painful choice.
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing that
Hmm.
very dramatically over the past year, and I think a lot of the angst probably that
Yeah.
we're seeing within our friends and family or on our social media feeds is this challenge that uh, people wanting the fact that there's only one truth or only one way to do things, instead of realizing that your truth and what's in your box may be very different than my truth, and both are okay.
Yeah.
And you're right. I think there's going to be a lot of anxiety and pain around, as some of this support crumbles for some of
Yeah.
these old structures, that people are going to have to change their mind about some things, and that will be harder for some people than others.
Yeah, and to not have to make everything that's different wrong, because there's a lot of difference going on.
Right.
And I was watching my news feed today, and or maybe it was yesterday, that Elon Musk and Tesla bought $1.5 billion of Bitcoin, and they're
Oh,
not
I
the
think I
only
saw that.
ones. They're not the
Right.
only ones, but the whole trend toward PayPal and Tesla and these other corporations buying Bitcoin is really so that, in part, people who operate in Bitcoin, people who use Bitcoin around the world, maybe they don't have a currency that's widely accepted like the dollar, but that they can participate in commerce using Bitcoin. But that's moving everything really away from the structure of national currency to a structure of this crypto, collective cryptocurrency and various ways of interacting economically without having to use national currency. And then it's interesting because it was such a big purchase, and it's such a big movement that's kind of been fairly quiet. But that one thing, you can look at it like, oh my gosh, it's the end of the world. What's going to happen if the dollar fails? And all my retirement's in the dollar. All these things you can panic over, but it's movements that are moving and that are happening and that are flowing, and to recognize that a lot of things are going to be changing. And the more you can allow yourself to recognize and flow with those changes and maybe shift timelines so that it doesn't feel so scary, or that you're not feeling left out in the cold with some of these changes. Because I don't know how to navigate the Bitcoin world. And oh my God, it was
You and me both.
$48,000. It was $48,000 for one Bitcoin yesterday.
Oh my gosh.
How do you
Holy
even
cow.
do that,
Right.
So it, it'll sort itself out,
Yes.
but as long as you're kind of riding the waves of the change, as opposed to holding on to your one pole and saying, I'm not leaving, I'm not letting go, I'm not leaving this pole, I'm going to hold on to this. And, as the water rises around you.
Right.
It's just one of those things. I think we're going to have to really live lightly and let go and flow with things, because so much is changing in ways and at speeds that we never thought imaginable.
It's true. And it's, one of the messages that's repeatedly come through for me over the past year is that we can't hold on to those narratives so tightly, but that also we have to be able to see beyond kind of the next step. And money was actually one of the examples that was given to me is, we want to say to ourselves, no, this would be bad, right? This would be bad that money would change, or it would be bad that there's one currency, because of all of these reasons that we can come up with. But the message I was getting was there's something on the other side of that. And so what you have to do is be willing to let go of, in this case, the idea of money as you know it, in order to get all the way to the other side of it. And so it is scary. It is, those are the things where we say, oh, I'm not that attached and I can roll with the punches. And then you're like, what about my money in the stock market? Right? Like you're more attached than you think you are. And so, what am I going to do if my mortgage company still expects me to pay in US dollars? It's all of these things. So it most likely won't happen overnight, and it's going to take time. And I think what's interesting about this year and kind of going forward, all this Aquarius energy is supportive of new technology, but we have to create it first. And so I, for one, am very curious and excited to see, even if some of the things in the short term where I think, oh gosh, okay, well, what is Tesla's outcome here? What are they going for with buying? If I can let go of that and where they're going in the short term and what it all means, and think this is, if we want things to change, these are the types of things that need to be supported. And so we let it fit. We let it figure itself out. We let the technology evolve so that we can get to the other side of, whatever that looks like. And I think that's part of the problem. We can't imagine what's on the other side any more than, our great grandparents could have imagined us working on the internet or the internet at all. So it just, it's a process.
It is. And being humans, we tend to go to the fear mode. Oh, things are changing. I don't know. I don't understand what these changes mean for me. I don't know how to adapt to these changes. Therefore, the change is bad and I have to hold on. And I get it, because I'm, I saw that and I had this little, I should have got into crypto.
Right. Should have bought GameStop a month ago. What was I thinking?
Exactly. And I'm like, okay, so on the timeline though, it's not necessarily about moving toward what you doing that 3D thing of like, I'm doing this in the world now and I want to shift to this timeline where I'm doing this in the world. It's like I'm able to show up to my life this way in the world and allow and receive it this kind of way in the world here in this timeline. And if I move to another timeline, I'm doing the same thing, but maybe I'm operating in the world a little bit differently, and I'm allowing and receiving things to come to me in a different way. Maybe I'm allowing and
Yeah.
I'm receiving more, and maybe I'm allowing and I'm receiving surrounded by different people. Or, it's because money is really like, whether it's US currency or Bitcoin or something, I mean, fundamentally is a method of exchange and value. And
Right.
if you are moving to timelines where you are still thriving in exchange and value, then whether it's dollar or Bitcoin or something that has not yet been imagined, the
Right.
energy of that is the same, even though the expression of that would be different.
It's such a point, because, and I think maybe that's our task now, right? Is
Hmm.
okay, how can I think about this currency of energy exchanging in a different way, or in the same way but with a different method or whatnot, and I'll get questioning and saying, well, what if I did it differently? What if, how
Yeah.
could it work? And some of those things do help us settle into other ideas.
Yeah, and I think to be able to open to timelines that you can't even imagine yourself. This is what I've been playing with. To to really shift, not like a timeline that I'm in, to a timeline where I know what I want and I've got my goals and my intentions and all that, but to be able to upshift my vibration, my frequency, my allowing, my expression, like all the things that I enjoy, but increase the amplitude of it, and open to a timeline that I might not have any idea what I'm doing or how things work on that timeline. But to really open up to the possibility of moving into some really amazing timelines, even though I don't know what I would be doing or how things might be working on those timelines. So I'm kind of doing
I
the
love that.
the the great leap of trust,
Right. And
um,
it does come back to
see what
just one choice at a
happens.
time, right? Because
Yeah, yeah,
I couldn't have manifested my life of today with my, 10 years ago thinking and understanding. And
yeah,
so, yeah,
absolutely.
but all you do is make one choice at a time, and all of a sudden you're there.
Yes. All right. So it has been wonderful talking with you. Can you tell people how they can reach you? And then to preface that, you can always find Amy at conversationsfromtheedge.net, and just scroll down till you find her and you'll find all these links. But you want to tell people how they can find you and any other information you might have about that?
Yes, my website is Following Hawks, just like the bird. So you can
Hmm.
find me at followinghawks.com. I'm Following Hawks on Instagram, and I have a podcast called The Earth Keepers Podcast. So you can go find all of those things.
All right. Excellent. And you can find all those links again at conversationsfromtheedge.net as well. Thank you, Amy. It's been great talking to you, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
Yes, thanks for having me, Kristine.
This is your host, Kristine Madera. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation from the edge of consciousness. You can find all our conversations at conversationsfromtheedge.net. You'll also find links to schedule a private conversation with me or any of my friends, as well as tools to help you expand your own consciousness and explore what's possible for you outside the boundaries of your current perceptions. Feel free to use this podcast to start your own conversation by sharing it with friends, on social media, in your blog, or even in your own podcast. And as always, live the adventure of pushing your own edge. It's the most amazing adventure there is.